What's good, YouTube? I'm about to react to the sad and greed death of Little Big Planet. Let's get it.
What's the biggest threat to the survival of a beloved game? Is it A, an uncaring developer who's moved on to something else, B, an inattentive publisher who only cares about profits, or C, a ruthless hacker whose only objective is to cause chaos? For Little Big Planet, the answer was all three. It went from a staple of Sony's PlayStation consoles with millions of loyal fans, to an abandoned mess with dead servers and no plans for a comeback. Hi, I'm the Internet Anarchist. I create weekly YouTube documentaries, and today, we're taking a closer look at the sad death of Little Big Planet, how it reached the sorry state it's in today, what made it popular in the first place, and how some people are still hopeful for its return. But as you'll see by the end of
This was actually a really fun game too, bro. Like, played jump. Dang, what's my first game? Nah, it's like I don't even know, but this game was really fun though. Can I play it? I was like probably 14, 13. Really good game. I don't know what happened to it though.
video, that's looking increasingly unlikely with each passing day. That said, to fully understand the tragedy of Little Big Planet, we first have to go back to where it all started. Little Big Planet was the brainchild of Alex Evans and Mark Healy, two of the names behind the now legendary Fable. After witnessing a sizable layoff at their company, Lionhead Studio, the two decided to leave with two more of their colleagues and form their own studio, Media Molecule, with their first title being an ambitious platformer that would go on to become Little Big Planet. However, as a ragtag group of artists and programmers, they lacked both the resources and the time to create a fully fledged game, and then simply hope that it will be a success. They needed funding fast. So after some brainstorming, they quickly put together a bare bones demo called Mr. Yellowhead in 2005, which, despite its crude graphics, had a lot of gameplay similarities with the final game. Sony immediately saw the potential in the idea, and after seeing a bit more of the game over the next 6 months, decided to publish it exclusively on their upcoming PlayStation 3 console. Little Big Planet was going to be a platform unlike any other, with a unique, timeless art style, and an emphasis on player creativity and user-generated content. Sony first unveiled it to the public at the 2007 Game Developers Conference, immediately winning the hearts of thousands who couldn't wait to get their hands on the game.
What the heck?
However, Sony wanted it to be ready by the end of the year, including the fully fleshed out level editor. It was hard work, but Media Molecule persevered, managing to deliver on each one of their promises at the game's launch in October of 2008. And the players couldn't have been happier. It sold millions of copies, was adored by the critics, and for a good reason. It had everything players wanted and more. The art style was just incredibly charming, the platforming mechanics were tuned to perfection, it had some of the most versatile character customization options at the time, and most importantly, the level editor was just as feature-rich and intuitive as everyone had hoped. However, the feature that turned Little Big Planet from just another fun game to a cultural phenomenon was its accompanying website, lbp.me. After logging in with their PlayStation Network account, players could share their own creations or dive into an ever-growing library of levels made by others. Put simply, there was an essentially endless supply of fresh content. Within just a year of the game's launch, players had already uploaded over 1 million unique levels, collectively playing them more than 240 million times. What players didn't know at the time was that this website would also become a big reason for the game's downfall, but for the time being, it was what kept players hooked long past a typical platformer's shelf life. Media Molecule also kept working on the game, patching out bugs, adding new cosmetic options, and releasing DLC content to keep fans happy. And it worked, with a review from back in the day stating, "Little Big Planet is perfect. It's as simple as that." What these satisfied players didn't realize was that their favorite game was about to become a whole lot better. The explosive success of Little Big Planet gave Media Molecule the confidence to start working on a sequel immediately after the first game's release. However, players weren't as enthusiastic about a sequel as you might imagine, and the reason was simple. the level editor. Many had poured countless hours into crafting over 3 million unique levels by this point. If the new game was incompatible with their creations, all their hard work would have gone to waste. This wouldn't have just hurt the sequel's sales, it risked splitting the Little Big Planet community in two. Those eager to explore the new tools and mechanics, and those unwilling to abandon the treasure trove of player-made content they'd come to love. Fortunately, Media Molecule understood this challenge better than most, and spent a lot of resources looking for a solution. Then, on the 10th of May 2010, they announced Little Big Planet 2, showcasing the sheer amount of variety that was possible with the new level editor. The new and improved creative toolset allowed players to create not just platforming levels, but entirely different game genres, with Media Molecule going as far as to claim that it wasn't just a quote platform game, instead was going to be quote a platform for games. Above all, they reassured the fanbase that Little Big Planet 2 would be fully backwards compatible with the previous title. The game finally came out in January of 2011, and to no one's surprise, quickly became the favorite of both the critics and longtime players.
The first Little Big Planet game was great. It was amazing. It was the start of an awesome community, and it did some really creative things. It gave people a ton of tools to work with to create some great levels. But if you take a look at its sequel, there's really no reason to go back.
It was the perfect sequel, which made everything better without destroying what players loved about the original. This also resulted in it becoming a massive financial success, selling over 350,000 copies in its first couple of weeks, and becoming the fourth most sold game in January 2011. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from here. Now, you'd think that after two wildly successful releases, all downhill first sold game 50,000 copies in its first couple of weeks, and becoming the fourth most sold game in January 2011. Unfortunately, it was all downhill from here. Now, you'd think that after two wildly successful releases, Media Molecule would keep the momentum going and knock the third entry out of the park. However, before players had the chance to get their hopes up, they received devastating news. Media Molecule was handing over the development of the third game to a different studio, Sumo Digital, a studio that had little experience with the franchise. This was going to be an uphill battle. Not only did Sumo have to improve upon the already fantastic Little Big Planet 2, they had to do it while keeping it backwards compatible with the millions of levels players created for the previous two games. And since they were replacing a respected studio, they also risked angering the existing fans with even the tiniest mistake. Unfortunately for Sumo, things did not get off to a good start. They drastically cut down the scope of the game, removing several characters, storylines, and planned features from the third game. And if that wasn't bad enough, Sony stepped in and made things even worse. Instead of helping the studio with more time and resources, Sony barged in one day and ordered them to make a version for the upcoming PlayStation 4 as well. In other words, Sumo now had to create two different versions of the game they were already struggling to complete in time. This was catastrophic for the game's development, something that would become apparent the second it was released to the public. Little Big Planet 3 came out in November of 2014, and it was by far the glitchiest, most unfinished entry into the franchise. Players were struggling to play user-generated levels, and in many instances, wiping their save files was the only way to get past the error message. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. Save files struggling to play user-generated levels, and in many instances, wiping their save files was the only way to get past the error message. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. Sometimes the game crashed bad enough to nearly brick the console it was running on. Sumo tried to fix these glitches with patches, but the core issues never went away, with one angry player on Reddit writing, "1 year later, and Little Big Planet 3 is still broken. This is unacceptable. The online barely functions, and there's still glitches where I fell off levels. On top of that, there's still many crashes." The broken game was turning longtime players away from the franchise, with one such person voicing his disappointment, stating, "Man, this game makes me so depressed. I loved the first two so much. Used Little Big Planet 2 to propose to my wife, and I was so excited for this one too so much. Used Little Big Planet 2 to propose to my wife, and I was was so excited for this one. We haven't touched it in months.
the
I
game
have
to
never been
propose
let
it,
down
right?
so hard
But
as I was by this game. But this begs the
crazy.
question, why? Why did
What?
Media Molecule abandon its star franchise to a third-party studio? Well, when asked about it, the studio's community manager stated that they made this decision so that they could focus on their next big project called Dreams. This was a full-blown creation engine that allowed users to make everything from games and animations to music, all on their PS4. Admittedly, this was the next evolution of the creative tools the studio built for Little Big Planet 2, but them abandoning the franchise that made them popular in the first place was still the wrong move in many people's eyes. Some might even argue that it would have been better if the
I wanna
third
get away
game
from
just never came out, and instead, those resources were spent on updating and maintaining the second. Despite its poor reception, however, its availability on 2 consoles instead of just one significantly boosted the game's financial performance, allowing it to sell over 5.5 million copies to date. In an ideal world, these high sales figures would directly translate to more players making more content and extending its shelf life. Unfortunately for the fans, Little Big Planet 3 was about to face a challenge far more devastating than the occasional game-breaking bug. In November of 2022, LBP.me, the website cataloging user-generated levels, went down after an attack from unknown hackers. And while the site was restored shortly after, this marked the beginning of its total destruction. You see, the solution Media Molecule came up with for backwards compatibility was to host all of the information on the same server. This made it easier to keep track of player statistics across the 3 different entries.
So hackers, they could literally just hack this and get everything from PS3 to PS4. They get everything if they hack it. So I don't know. They put on one server. What?
Even though this
I'll get
method
that.
was highly effective,
Yeah,
it
but-
also came with a serious drawback. Any security vulnerability from the
Yeah.
original 2008 Little Big Planet now affected everything that followed.
Yeah.
Judging by the
That's
sudden
what I'm
website blackout, it was clear that someone had found a way to exploit that vulnerability.
bro.
And as expected, the hacker returned on the 6th of March 2021 and shut down the game's online functionality with a DDoS attack. Anyone who tried to play a user-generated level was met with an error message stating that a problem had occurred. After staying silent for 4 days, Sumo finally took the servers down on March the 10th, claiming that they did so to, quote, investigate some technical issues. These servers remained offline till May, but even after coming back online, things weren't right. Players were experiencing strange crashes and glitches that were never an issue before. The cycle of Sumo taking the servers down, bringing them back online, and getting attacked by hackers continued a couple of times, before coming to a stop in April 2024. Not because Sumo patched the vulnerability, but because they decided to pull the plug, shutting servers down for good and killing the game completely. The franchise that had held strong for over 15 years was finally dead in the water. Some fans tried to protest this decision online to no avail. They had nowhere left to go. While technically, there was one game they could still play, a spin-off called Sackboy: A Big Adventure, which came out in November of 2020. Unfortunately, this version of the game lacked the one feature that made Little Big Planet special in the first place: user-generated content,
Yeah.
resulting in most fans seeing this spin-off as an insult and hating it with a passion, with one person even equating it to receiving a middle finger from the developers and Sony. In the end, seeing such a beloved game go out like this is just sad. As a YouTube comment puts it, as much as I'm devastated to see it gone, I think what's even sadder is that I will always see Little Big Planet as something that was killed rather than something that just died on its own. There were better ways to handle this than wiping the servers and converting millions upon millions of user-created levels to nothing more than lost media. That being said, some fans are still clinging to hope. Some are wildly speculating based on job listings at Sumo Digital. Others are hatching elaborate plans to resurrect the game themselves, like turning the game's mascot into a viral meme so Sony would see the potential in bringing back the franchise. Sadly, judging by the silence from Sony, Media Molecule, and Sumo Digital, a Little Big Planet comeback seems nothing more than a distant dream, at least for now.
W video, man. W video. Alright, that's it for the reaction. Man. Peace.